everyone, and welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us today for our conversation on Kindred Creation and Black Futures. I'm Pele Shalev, the Public Events Specialist for the Public Programs Department of the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We may be joining from different places all over the world, and as a representative of CIIS, I want to start off by expressing our debt and gratitude to the Ramai Tushuloni, the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS campus is located on the traditional unceded lands of the Ramai Tushuloni, which they call Yelamu. In the Ramai Tushuloni language, Yelamu identifies both the people and the territory. This acknowledgement is only a single small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with Indigenous tribes and organizations in our community, and does not begin to acknowledge all the native lands, languages, and territories where you are right now, or where you live and work every day. I invite you to take a moment now to acknowledge the land where you reside, and to commit to learn more about the native communities near you, and to support their work. If it feels right for you to share in the chat, please do. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource. Before we start, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A after the conversation tonight. Please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. We'll be pulling questions from that form, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Chat will be enabled during this event, but please note that it is not being moderated, and our presenters cannot see the chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event. If you choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn the chat off at any time, and we encourage you to do so if you find it negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you're having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing the page. And then if you still have issues, we suggest that you adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Preston Vargas and Aida Mariam Davis, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Preston Vargas carries the blessings, wisdoms, and joys of his ancestors. He was born from the land of his grandmother's ancestral Wampanoag people. It is a place where his liberated Black ancestors found family and home with the local Indigenous communities. It is also the land where his mother's Cape Verdean immigrant ancestors cultivated cranberry bogs and blueberry bushes amidst deciduous forests. Though he lives on the Pacific coast, Preston honors his ancestors, the land water spirits of Massachusetts, who periodically draw him back home. Preston holds a PhD in transformative studies and a master's in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness from CIIS. Preston Vargas has worked in community-based organizations with underserved communities for 20 years. Currently, he is the director of the Center for Black and Indigenous Praxis at CIIS. His focus is on engaging Black and Indigenous folks as they reclaim their ancestral wisdom traditions in present-day context to heal their community souls through oracular art and ceremonial collaborations with their ancestors, deities, and spirits of the land. Preston weaves the gifts of his ancestral traditions and scholarship with a commitment to anti-oppression, pleasure activism, and his embodiment of decolonial love. Author, founder, and organizer, Aida Mariam Davis is relentlessly committed to the dignity and distinction of the African and Black way of life. She is part of a long tradition of poets, philosophers, and prophets who participate in liberation movements in the US and abroad. Specifically, she is a descendant of anti-colonial fighters who kept Ethiopia free from colonialism when virtually all of Africa was colonized. Her life's work has been to excavate the historical and ongoing impacts of settler colonialism, making explicit the ways in which extraction, oppression, and enslavement serve the goals of empire, not least by severing ancestral connections and disrupting profound and ancient relationships to self, nature, and community. Kindred Creation is her first book. And now, let me turn it over to Preston Vargas and Aida Mariam Davis.
Good evening, Aida. Hey, Preston, thank you so much for your willingness to host this conversation.
Absolutely. I've been listening to you and Kindred Creation on audiobooks, so it's great to put the narrator and the voice of this creation to the person. So thank you so much for sharing space with us tonight.
Yes, thank you for your thoughtful curation and the beautiful questions I know that you will be offering this group today. I just am grateful to be in your space and to be here with all of you in the virtual CIIS community.
Mhm. Well, let's jump right in. There was so much in the book, and for me, I love the slip between how I feel and how I think. And it's recursive, it spirals out and spirals in. And in this work, you emphasize this necessity of kindred creation going radically to the root. And I can feel it in your writing. So, what are some of the most overlooked or erased aspects of Black heritage that you hope readers will uncover and reclaim through this work and through their works?
Think it's captured in the sentence, you were African before you were anything else.
Mm,
And what I mean by that, that probably is a theme you felt throughout the book as well, which is we are all children of one mother, I believe, Africa. And we have been separated and severed and have had difficult experiences, frankly, because of kidnapping, enslavement, and even Africans on the continent not recognizing that interconnection. But nevertheless, we do have a united African beingness and divergent expressions of that. And to me, that allows us to tap into our heritage, our humanity, and our culture in a new way. Specifically, when I think about unforgetting the past,
mm.
our past does not begin and end with American history, white history, right? What did Malcolm say? The rock landed on us. Plymouth Rock landed on us. We did not,
You didn't
right,
land on it, yeah.
discover this land. Yes. And part of that is mathematicians, architects, medicine people, healers, they all have origins in Africa from what we can gather, right? Uh, Beyond the literal sort of context of history as understood by Western society, right? Like what is documented. There's also a part of history that was never documented but embodied. So we
Mm,
think about, uh, you know, the ways in which folks in the hood pour a little liquor out for the homies because they've transitioned. That's what we do in many places in West Africa, and they call it libation ceremonies. There are ways of braiding our hair, creating altars in our homes, right? All of these things I think are continuations of our histories that even subjugation, death, all the systems of oppression that have worked against us could not take away from us. So there's that embodied piece. There's the fact that we know that trees communicate, which if you read the book, that means something. But it's also, I think, the idea that uh, we also have histories of rebellion, of refusal, of resistance. And of course, we know of Harriet Tubman, we know of Nat Turner. We probably even know many of us of Maroon societies, but there are many other people and activities and places and ways of being and epistemologies that allow us to be insurgents in this environment. And those histories are important because they help us imagine not only what's possible, but what we can do right now today. That it's not
mm,
this, out of the ordinary thing. And I think the book aims to be like a quilt, taking the discarded pieces, stitching them together to make something beautiful that gives us warmth, that gives us, uh, comfort, that can hopefully be intergenerationally valuable, but also built upon, that everyone is adding a piece of cloth. And that's, I think, how our history is meant to be conveyed and not in what, you know, history books tell us about ourselves.
Mm. And you utilize that quilt analogy in the book as well. I recognize that. And
Yes,
that it really, it seems like it allows for multiple truths, like multiple, as you said, multiple expressions of Blackness, multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of being, instead of a meta narrative, another meta narrative.
exactly.
No.
And I think that's a trick of colonization,
Yeah.
that there's a binary.
Mhm. Now, you said unforgetting, and I love that term. You also use rememory. And so, like in Kindred Creation, you discuss how bodies hold memories, and you touch on Black feminist fiction and historical fiction concepts of rememory. So, what is rememory, and how can it offer pathways to healing and world making and this quilting you're talking about?
First of all, Toni Morrison is the patron saint of the book
Yes.
and my life. So I'll just say that explicitly. And I know that you share the love of fiction. Um, she's just been, you know, such a powerful ancestor in reminding me when I'm writing about people. And when I say that, I mean Black people, right? And I
Mhm.
can just be focused on that. In Beloved, one of her sort of most acclaimed novels, she has a main character, Sethe, who has a memory that is hard to explain because she did not personally experience it, but it's of her people being enslaved in Africa and being brought here. And Western settler colonial racial capitalist society will say that's not real, that's a delusion, sort of dismiss it as they do many Black and Indigenous ways of being, right? As primitive, as, you know, just not real. And the novel goes into great detail about that experience, which she calls rememory, the ability to go back in time, even before your own, and have an embodied knowledge of what happened to you and your people, and be able to relay that for future generations. And I think that with that analogy, there's also another of furniture, sunken furniture. There are these vestiges, these, you know, um, pieces and parts of our lives that are sunken and worn with use, and we don't know why we just keep using them. We keep doing the same thing. And there's a subconscious element of, you know, how do we employ these metaphors to have us detach from our, maybe not indoctrinated, but the institutionalized ways that we've learned things to be true. We know it's true because it's always been that way, right? That's the furniture analogy. We know it's true because we can prove it or someone else said it was true. But the idea that a Black woman can say, I know this to be true in my spirit, and I have visions, and I understand, and I can in a detailed way explain those to you, that to me not only should be valid, but we should be embracing as alternative ways of knowing. And we are, I think, doing ourselves a collective disservice when we dismiss it as, you know, um, folklore. I will say one last thing that I think is so critically important when we think about the idea of the settler state calling something delusional. I think first and foremost of Malcolm X's mother, who they thought she was crazy and they put her in an insane asylum because she believed she could be completely free. And they
Mm.
thought that that was so crazy that she needed to be institutionalized. Harriet Tubman was beat so bad that she started to have visions of complete freedom. And it is these visions that, may have us, it have real implications, but if we stay true to them and really commit, we can really see how they change the world by birthing Malcolm X and raising him, and of course, the Underground Railroad. So I think that there are real implications for saying, I believe what I saw, I believe what I think, I believe it. Um, and that if they're telling you not to, there may be more reason to believe it.
Hmm. I can see this like literally living through your work. And I'm struck that you use parables. It wasn't stories or myths or folklore, like you said, but it's I don't know if you were engaging in rememory, but this co-creation of parables is amazing. You use parables as a powerful tool in this book. And tool might even be the wrong word, but you touch on this process of co-creating the parables in Kindred Creation. What is it about this type of parable form, this type of co-creation that lends itself to Black world making? And how do you see these parables shaping individual and collective liberation?
From the outset, when I wrote the proposal for the book, I was so committed to the idea that this book needed to represent Black and African epistemologies and Indigenous. I really wanted melody. I wanted metaphor. Something you'll notice, I like a lot of alliteration. And I wanted sort of a miracle element of it, a metanoia, if you will. And I know from my own lived experience that my elders teach and learn through allegories and parables. Parables are very important, and not the religious kind necessarily, but of course they're used for religious purposes because they are so powerful and they convey a very clear moral lesson that we should actually be applying in our lives. Like, you can read a metaphor and be like, that makes sense. Good for those people. Parable is supposed to be, oh, I should change my paradigm. I should consider something new. Why would she use those words and not that word? And how does this part of the journey relate to that? And that was an intentional device that I wanted in the book. When I handed in the book to the publisher, they said, so are you going to cite who wrote the parables? I said, I wrote them. I made them up. And I think because the book is so heavy on the sort of colloquial and academic mix, that this is a very different kind of writing. It's fiction, really. I just made them up. But I think that it also allows us to release ideas that we've been wed to or we've been indoctrinated with. And I think about the parable of the table being really specific to do that. The table is something we've all aspired to, right? People are like, I want a seat at the table. If you don't have a seat, bring a folding chair, the seat, the table. This is an important pursuit. Many professionals, many people in, a lot of settings are looking for. And in the parable, I really question, do you want a seat that your ancestors were denied, your mother was denied? Do you want a seat where your friends are on the menu? Do you want to see, right? Like, what is the table really about? Is this where you want to be? And so I've noticed people reaching out to me about the power of the parables. The other stuff is really supporting, I think, the defining 3 parables in the book. I would love to hear what are your thoughts on parables?
Well, first, like that, the what you said about elders, I'm like, yeah, I get that. It's so subtle. Like if you're not paying attention, and if you're not used to it, you might not even know. I there were times where I'm like, oh wait, that wasn't just a story so and so told me. That was instruction. That was sacred instruction, sacred ritual. Like these little drops, these little gems that just roll off their tongue. And there's this beautiful way that elders in my life have been able to like let them. They just drop the parable and go. And it's your responsibility. I think it's my responsibility to take it up. As you say, like you made them up, I want to push back and be like,
Yeah,
did you make them up?
I
Or
know
was
that's
the
right.
entire universe speaking
You're
through
right.
you? Right?
You're right.
That's how
You're right.
that's what I call
You're
oracular art. Like
100%
I
right.
am
Yes.
in, and I've told people like there's a
Yes.
difference. And I think Black folks, and I hear it in your writing, I feel it in your words. It's not just being a hollow reed, right? It's like whatever comes through you, it picks up little particles of who you are. It flavors the water. There's no such thing as like this hollow reed and the water is tasteless. I can taste you all in
Yes.
this, and it's beautiful.
Yes. I appreciate that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. You're
that's
right.
my feeling
You're
on
right.
parables.
Thank
You
you.
didn't make them
Yes.
up.
Affirm. Yes.
You do a fantastic job of working through Indigenous-based frameworks in the book. But before you touch on building building frameworks of belonging, dignity, justice, and joy, which you call BDJJ, before you get to that step, you first chose the example of the Ethiopian Empress Taitu. I think I might be pronouncing her name.
Yes,
Taitu,
you're saying it.
and
Yes.
her MB, or like hell no response to
Yes.
maintaining the status quo. You know, she had that response, and you highlight this as like, and I'll quote, it's to highlight our unique knowledge of Africans and Black people and our ability to resist in our own way, rather than matching the violence inflicted upon us. And so even before I get to this point where I can build a framework of belonging, dignity, and justice, I sometimes find myself saying the hell no to the status quo. But how can folks move from MB or hell no to leveraging their unique knowledges?
Yes. I'll tell maybe this audience the shorter version of the story in there so I can segue. Taitu had a very comfortable life. She was a very wealthy woman, not only because she was an empress, but before she became an empress, she came from, sort of a family with a lot of money. And she found it appalling that the Italians were occupying our land and just wanted to hang out indefinitely. And she had been looking around, Africa. Nobody stays indefinitely. They have an intent to take over. And her husband really was enjoying their time, their food, all the things that they could offer. And she decided that not only was this not going to work, she defied her husband in a deeply and continued to be patriarchal society. But she took it upon herself to create something immediately that would address the issues. And so she went to where they, she figured out where they were and used her unique knowledge of the land. She knew where the rivers, the lakes, she knew where everything was. And she took a couple hundred soldiers and dammed their water supply. It wasn't long after that they left. And I think I'm only, sort of putting myself in her shoes to say everyone was telling her no. Her husband, her parents, she didn't have any children, so she wasn't necessarily embraced by in Ethiopian culture. It is just like many patriarchal societies, women are there to sort of co-create and just be quiet. And she was the exact opposite of that.
Hell no.
And so, right, exactly. And she lived her life that way, and she really freed our country completely. I bring those personal elements up because I think those people who have more intersections of identity are in the best position to lead any movement for freedom, because she had experienced, feeling like a pariah in so many different settings, feeling like she wasn't worthy, that her ideas weren't good, that she didn't understand, politics and the way things work. She didn't need to understand them. She knew how to get what she needed done, and she did. And I think that this idea that all of us have, everyone says you're an expert on your lived experience or that you have unique knowledge, but do you act on it? How do you leverage your unique knowledge? Okay, I know where this is, I know where that is, and I see the problem, I've diagnosed it. What am I willing to do to address it? And for me, I read a lot of poetry. Nikki Giovanni's Revolutionary Woman has become the mantra of my life, which is this poem where she talks about, I thought I could start a revolution by having all the facts, by going to protest, by reading white people for who they really are, right? It's just a long list of all the things she and many of us assume will create a revolution. And she ends by saying, but finally I realized the revolution was me returning and becoming a natural woman. And so for me, it's about who am I in my natural state? I'm about dignity. I'm about belonging. I know when people or, institutions mess up, I'm about justice. I want to make it right. I'm about joy. That's the biggest thing I'm about. I'm here to celebrate life, living. And so those are those words, and why they're so important to alternatives, any alternatives that I create. But I think everyone should do the internal introspective work of who am I at my most natural state when I'm not hustling, when I'm not thinking about the next thing, when I'm not, uh, in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, right? If I'm not in my trauma responses, who am I? Some of us don't know her that well, don't know that person. And I think that Taitu really knew herself. And I wish that for, all of us.
Mhm. This knowing yourself, of being able to diagnose what's happening. And I've been in that position that you're talking about, and my fervor and fire was so strong, but I forgot the joy. I really did. For years, for decades, I was the fighter, but that forgot the joy. And there is this, like, I call it a tenor. There's like a tenor in your book. Like many freedom movements are rooted in resistance, but you take on refusal as an act of love, and it offers a different perspective in Kindred Creation. It feels more like a call to explore refusal and resistance differently than I have in the past. Through world making, world building acts. Can you share like a paradigm shift from the book that challenges how we typically think about resistance?
Yes. I mean, there are many ways I think for us to explore resistance. One is rest as resistance, the nap ministry, and Trisha's amazing book and her whole approach is something I highlight. I think that uh, I talk specifically about Black joy, that joy can have a race, and that it's very clear about this very distinct feeling of being in touch with your humanity and heritage and that celebration of it. Um, I think this might be the part of the episode where I talk about Kendrick Lamar, and I talk about, you know, in subtle and indirect ways we can resist and refuse. And part of it, I think what was so beautiful about Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl is he refused to make himself smaller. He was not humble. And he refused to not bring his whole tribe with him. He literally brought everyone sort of with him that represented who he was and where he was from. And I could tell the entire 12 minutes he was performing, he was experiencing supreme joy, which brought me joy. And I think
Mm,
in the resisting of, making yourself universal, there were a lot of people who were Black that didn't understand what was going on. Just were like, what is this about? What did these things mean? But he never abandoned himself. He never made himself smaller. I talk about several athletes who do the same thing. Marshawn Lynch is well known for saying in interviews, I'm only here so I won't get fined. That is his way of being both subordinate but staying true to his humanity, resisting in subtle, small, but powerful ways sends the message to institutions and individuals. I am not leaving my body. I am not leaving myself. Not for you, not for anyone. I'm also not going to endanger myself. And I think that's
mm,
a dance I want to offer. At no point should we be reducing ourselves or running away. At the same time, we have to be alive. We have to be safe. And you know, I think in that section, I tried to offer a lot of different ways we can explore refusal and resistance. I did not talk as much about violent resistance, though I believe it has a place. So it's not because I'm being sort of, naive, but I think that there are so many other ways to explore that have not been written about, uh, that I wanted to offer people, everyday people, ordinary people like me, and famous folk and academics and different kinds of Black folk. We are not tied to what people call us. We respond to the name that we call ourselves, and that is resistance in and of itself.
what would it look like to, I'm like thinking, oh, what would it look like before I go to what, whether it's work or whether it's protesting or whether it's creating something, if I grab the hand of, little black joy, right? That's it. Because what my elders told me is like, you have a problem with something, try to make relationship with it. And like, oh yeah, I'm missing black joy. So how do I, okay, come on, black joy, come with me. Like, to this thing, this thing, this thing. There are just little nuggets in here that I'm like having aha moments on about, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I think a lot of it, just to add a, a point to that, is reframing.
Mm,
I talk about, when I met Angela Davis, I asked her what it was like to be on the FBI most wanted list and being a fugitive of the state. And it wasn't very long until she corrected me and told me I was not a fugitive. I made myself unavailable. I think just that way, first of all, we need to make ourselves unavailable to a lot of things, first and foremost. But secondly, please take that. Secondly, though, you make that paradigm shift, you're free. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not a criminal. You don't get to call me that.
mm-hmm.
I'm back in my joy,
Mm-hmm. I'm
and
not
I think
taking
that
that
there's
naming ceremony. Mm-mm.
no, you got that. That's on you. You can call whoever you want that, but I don't respond to that. And so I think having um, a love of language or a commitment to precision in language really can help liberate people to say, I can see maybe the realm of which you're saying that, but that doesn't apply to me. I don't accept that.
It takes a little bit of imagination too, I think, to be able to reframe these things. And when you write about imagination, you write about it as both a site of oppression or where oppression can occur and a force of liberation. And what strategies are available or are offerings for reclaiming imagination from that colonial and capitalist constraint that you were talking about in the book?
Yes. I read another novelist, Kenyan novelist, Thiongo, who wrote Decolonizing the Mind.
Mm-hmm.
And he very quickly in the book talks about how he was dreaming in the colonizer's language. I dream. I don't dream in my ancestral language. I don't dream in, Amharic. I dream in English. And so there are parts of my culture I can't access, right? Language in our collective indigenous traditions is, I think, to not just convey thoughts, but to have a melody, to be playful, to give joy, to be engaging in ways that I don't think English has. And so in that way, there's a huge limit, I think, on our imagination and on, our connection, because language also connects us to our ancestors. It connects us to future generations. Like there's that role that shapes. I also think our birthright and our, sort of endowment is our ability to be inventive. You take away the drums, we start clapping. Anything you do, we're gonna find another way to do it, and we're gonna do it great, and it's gonna be beautiful and joyful. And I think that portion of our imagination, you mentioned iteration earlier. I think that we can really access ideas and ideologies that aren't widely accessible because, and this I believe very strongly, we are the closest to what freedom I think we as oppressed peoples can create and find freedom more than any other group of people because we know very clearly what it means and what conditions need to exist for it to happen. And because of that, our imaginations expand very widely. We also know our oppressor, I think, better than they know themselves. So that also allows us to create new life and new ways of being that abandon those harmful ways, but that offer us new pathways.
Yeah, many of us have had to learn those other ways in order to survive. And so being able to reframe them and restructure them. Mhm. I'm curious as a person, I love words, and you and I have talked about
Yes.
fiction and novels, but what happens when words fail us? And how does this move through your body? How does it move through one's body? How do you draw it in through the pores and expel it out through the breath?
Something I've observed to be true is that Black, African, and Indigenous people are deeply spiritual and believe that the spirit world is with us. And I think because of that, uh, and embodied knowledge, we can experience things that, as you said, words fail us. I think about the power of poetry, the power of rap, the power of, the ways we express ourselves that have been intentionally dismissed or denied, but really, I think, get deep into our core, the power of prayer. These are things that are integral to our ways of life that we should reconnect to. And that capitalism says you don't have time for, right? Because productivity is the P you should be focusing on, not poetry, not prayer, not these other elements that we know create life, really create a meaningful, full life. So I think we should also be okay. I mean, so I have children and I am always telling them boredom is great. It's okay that like you don't have everything lined up. We don't know where everything is. That's okay. It's actually, the fertile ground for creativity. You can think about all the possibilities that there are, or you can do nothing. And I mean, have we ever had really the luxury in the history of this country to do nothing?
As you say it, my
I'm not
body's
aware of it,
clenching. My body's
right?
clenching. You know, that growing up doing nothing was frowned upon in my Black
Oh my
household, right? It's
goodness.
like you couldn't take a nap. You could not, there's no relaxing, right? And so as
Oh my
you're,
God. Don't watch the TV. No.
yeah, I'm gonna give you something constructive to do. That's what my mother always said. And I understand why.
Yes.
And at this age now, with my nibblings, being able to share, like, let's rest. Let's, put your phones down. Let's be with each other. This
Yes.
is radical resistance.
Yes.
And it's
Have you heard of
ongoing.
liming? Hmm.
Liming. No, tell me what liming is.
It's in, sort of Caribbean culture. It's doing nothing. But I just
Ah,
like the way it sounds, liming. Like,
mm-hmm.
you want to go lime? Yeah. Just do nothing together.
Just get ripe.
Exactly. Yes.
I find this work as what it feels emergent to me, right? Like as a creator, I'm curious what in this book or what in this process emerged that you weren't expecting, whether it was part of the book or how it played out, in your being in life and world and relationships.
As she said that, I started to laugh because uh, so I was pregnant 3 times while writing this book, and the third one I was very surprised by. So when he said that, I'm like, it's the third child. That's what really emerged and surprised me. But within the book, the context of the book was originally entitled Decolonized Design. And so that was a major evolution to get to Kindred Creation. And decolonize had taken up the concept, taken up a lot of space in my life. I have since released that from my ministry. It's no longer something I'm called to do. To me, it feels like fixing something someone else broke,
Mm.
and I'm not interested in doing that. It is good and meaningful work. I just don't want to do it. Uh, so I had to release Decolonize. I also released design because my experience in the design thinking world and just having a lot of like, what does design mean? If you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different definitions. It's landscaping, it's architecture, it's social services, right? It's improving or design. And so that also felt like I needed to release because I'm not interested in just improving or reforming something.
Mm.
I am fundamentally, to your point, pulling things from the root, more abolitionist. Like, I want complete freedom. I want something completely different than what has been offered. So then, and this is how I arrived at belonging, dignity, justice, and joy. I go to this proverbial drawing board of how do we organize ourselves as Black people, as Africans, as Indigenous? I mean, most societies are organized around kinship. They're organized around, family, tribes, relationships, ultimately. And so kindred is, an ode to that, but it's also, I love Octavia Butler. She wrote a book, Kindred, and it was about looking back into history while also being, in this day and age. So it had double meaning there, and creation. This is an important evolution I've had, not just because I was pregnant, but I think because creation stories, the concept of creation is so important in Indigenous society globally. It's how we tell our history. It's also how we give life. Creation is about giving something life. You can create a program, you can create a human. There are a lot of different, but creation requires gestation and conception and, a care and concern and nurturing that's very different than design. And so I iterated on that, and creation has really been, I think, one of the most generative. That's why the whole third section is about reclaiming creation. Ultimately, it's reclaim, but it's about creation because it is something we all have the ability and access to do. We don't need permission to create. And we really can iterate from there. So my creation and your creation could be similar, but they could be totally different. And there's no, it doesn't feel like it's competitive. With design, it's like there's a qualitative standard. And if you're not meeting that or quantitative also, then it's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody says your creation, your baby's not good enough. Maybe the world is, but I'm saying, you give birth, it's a beautiful baby, right? So that's a big evolution paradigm shift that I personally have had just in writing the book.
I love this yes and of yes, there are folks working in decolonizing. And what about feeding the world? Like, what about feeding the world you want to create? And I find that not
That
as many folks are doing that. And this is that sort of invitation. You're repositioning world making as an ongoing process, but also a communal process rather than a destination. And so in this communal process, what might be some of the frontiers that, oh, that's such a gross word. What might be some of the unknown, unknown land that Black world makers, might be going through next? And what tools, what can they learn from Kindred Creation that can help them on this journey, this ongoing journey?
a wild idea I've been thinking about playing with is, do we create our own society, our own city, our own little community where we embody the ways that we value? I think about the Great Dismal Swamp where, you know, runaway, formerly enslaved people created their own village and they abandoned capitalism and they used sort of African bartering techniques. They went back to who they were and they created, in essence, an African village here in America. Something I'm interested in. What would it look like with, a few families to think about literally creating our own world, our own, with the tax on everything. I would say on education, on this, on that, but like with the tax on everything in this country, we have nothing to lose but our chains, as Asada said.
Oh,
So
could you say
why
that again?
not? We have nothing to lose but our chains. And so why not experiment with having a little freedom school for our kids, a couple families? Why not uh, do meals together on like why not create mutual aid? I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and in the aftermath of the fire, I've never seen such generosity in my life.
Mm.
People giving, I mean, and I felt compelled too, like, here, take my kids' bed. They don't sleep anyways. Just take the bed, and like giving all that we had. And I'm like, what if this was a way of living? That we were just that generous and we were just that caring. Oh, this happened to you. I'm sure there are things that are happening to my neighbors right now that I don't know about that they could also use my care and generosity for. And that requires deeper relationships. So, but I think you do that through trying to build organizations or institutions. I am a longtime organizer, so we're always trying to build organizations. And one that I saw my parents create very informally was called an IDIR, where basically, and it comes out of peasants' society, they would sort of an insurance policy, but it's about breaking bread together and joyfully gathering, but everybody pays every month. And if someone passes, if you have funeral costs, if you have something, like all the money just goes to the person who needs it. But then every month you just get back to gathering, you eat together, you rotate who's how. To me, growing up, I thought it was actually just social. I had no idea money was transacted. I was
Mm.
just observing the fun. And then as I got older, I'm like, oh, wow, everyone's helping with this funeral. Everyone is helping with this cancer treatment. We are all, and so these are small ways I think we can return to our epistemologies, our ways of life, but also actually meet our needs, actually feel whole and fulfilled. Because I'm not interested in just building, building, building and harvesting in 20 years. I want to feel
Mm.
something now. I want to experience something now, and I think, you know, putting some music and food to a lot of things makes it better. That's my experience. And to the extent we can do that, I think we should.
I'm familiar with that concept, although I'm familiar with it from Susu and
Yes, exactly.
like contributing money every month, and then folks, how do like I think from my Cape Verdean culture, there was a level of trust there. And maybe it's because
Yes.
a lot of folks had migrated to the US, they needed each other. It's really hard for me to imagine doing that with a lot of my very Americanized friends. The trust is missing.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
How do we get to that place of trust where I can trust my well-being and it really is kinship?
Yeah. That interdependence. You know, Capitalism has really become just a disease because of the fact of, you know, there's never enough. You just
Mm.
keep wanting more because, I think when I think of my friends and possibly doing this, I am actually concerned about consistency. Would you come regularly? You may come, you may
Mm.
deposit, do it once or twice, but would you take this seriously? Or would a competing event trump this very quickly because you seem healthy or you have no need for it, right? And I think the challenge for those of us who are trying to have a paradigm shift, I mean, I guess I return back to Taitu. We don't need everyone. If you can do it with 3 people, let's start with that and maybe build momentum and like keep it sacred. You mentioned that, like these rituals. I mean, make it almost like ceremony, and it does have to have values alignment. People have to be like, I want this will add enrichment to my life and yours, and I care about that and I want to do that. But when I use that as my filter, I have like 3 people, 3 families, three, groups of people I can think of, and that might just be it. And you just do that. Uh, and most good things, I think, gain momentum, and that it's not necessary. This is something, Preston, I actually want your thoughts. I struggle with the concept of consensus.
Mm.
I do. The idea that everyone needs to agree or we all need to be. I don't think so. I'm not sure I believe in that, I would love to hear your thoughts, but I think that is an idea that may stop us because we may feel well, I don't have enough people, or it's not, it's not growing, it's not gaining momentum, because we want people to be all on the same page, or do we?
Mm.
So what do you think?
Consensus and the consensus process, it takes forever, but I feel like that's not a problem. Actually, it's challenging
Sure.
my, capitalism and my dude fix now, fix now. What I have found in the consensus process that trips it up is the attachment, is the ego. It's sometimes about um, being right instead of being joyful or being happy. Um, I
Mhm.
can understand blocking things in the consensus process if it is if it's out of our values. But I might not
Yeah.
agree with something. I don't need to block it. I can let it, in that consensus process, I can let it happen. I can still be present. It's not against my values. It just might not be what I would have chosen. But I love the people in the group, and I'm here in that consistency. And again, like for me, that is about negotiating relationships. Relationships take work,
Yeah.
right? And there is we meet each other in places, and for me, consensus
Hmm.
process. I also say I will not do consensus process with folks I know I cannot trust.
That part. Yep.
Yeah. And
I
in those
appreciate that.
terms, like as I'm reading through the book, I'm also thinking like, wow, I can be very there are ways in my life that I can be much more discerning about what energies I let in, where I put my focus, and how does that play out. And I'm curious, like, first of all, I love the chunking up in the three different sections, but also how you go into them. And I was like, this took a lot of like red lines, like a lot of discernment to like think. And I'm wondering, what is your discernment process? How do you come to that place, not only of like what goes in the book, but what is right in your life right now and what is not?
I appreciate you with the red lines, because the way I was like, nope, revise, nope, and just a lot of intention. I hope you feel a lot of intention in it.
Mhm.
I My sort of discernment practices, I look for inspiration everywhere, and I need to do a better job. And thank you for reminding me. The universe brought me you to remind me that, like, I do. I mean, I say I believe I have prophetic messages, so I do believe that messages are being um, transmitted or shared with me, and they're my responsibility to share. So sometimes I'm like, I actually can't locate precisely where I got this idea, but it needs to be expressed. Um, and when I say I look for inspiration everywhere, I really learned that from Chinua Achebe, another novelist.
Things fall apart.
Novelists, right?
Mhm.
They have just
Mhm.
given me everything. Um, where, he describes ants and ant hills in the savannah, and just like mundane things have so much to offer us. And so, like, if I'm at the farmer's market, I am paying attention. I
Mm.
spent a lot of days pretty exhausted, but I am looking around like, why did why is this happening like this? What are they, what could this mean? Sort of looking for maybe not signs, but messages, if you will, in the universe, and where I'm at. And my life's experience has taught me that what the world calls ordinary people have the most information to offer us, the most knowledge. And so I have always gone to those places, to those sources, to get direction.
I find that like the messages are everywhere because the universe, the land, the ancestors, everything is always speaking. There's always a communication going through. There's always a resonance, whether it's understood or not. When folks are reading your book or listening to your book, if they could take away an essential call to action or maybe some essential pieces for their heart from Kindred Creation, what would you hope it would be?
I hope that they would feel inspired to remember, bring together members of their ancestors, sort of follow the cycle. The book is intended to be circular. the cycle of the parts, but really to do so in a way that I hope I did, which is never abandon yourself. You are your center. Everything you know should be at the center. Your lived experiences, your favorite songs, your favorite books, the people who have mattered to you, they need to be, however you want to express them, expressed. And I think I really hope that people read this and say, like, I could do that. I could write a book like this, or I want to write a book like this, or maybe not a book, make a video, whatever your creative outlet is, but that it is inspiration to create life-giving alternatives in death-making situations, knowing that there's always something else you can make and that alternatives are within us and within reach.
And those times where freedom, because you've mentioned freedom is not individual, but it's also not linear. In those times where one can't feel freedom because maybe we're in that cycle, in that recursive cycle, back in or back out. What is something folks can hold on to or let go of in those moments?
I think Black and Indigenous people need to remember we have always been free. There has been no moment in time because freedom is, an internal place first. Now, have we also experienced all the things that I mentioned and remember? Of course, but our minds have been free. We have always had a sense of freedom. We've always expressed ourselves. It's important we know who we are and whose we are. We are, God don't play about me. I know that part. And I think God don't play about the Black diaspora. And we have to remember that, and people say, walk as if the ancestors, created the room for you, and they did in a literal way. I believe that their spirits are there, that they have, there's a portion in the book where I talk about colonial hauntings. Those come back when there's unfinished business. That's just what it is. And so I think that there's this idea of moving with just the authority of being. And I think about belonging. For so long, I thought belonging was physical, emotional, psychological safety, often that other people created, but that I could experience and walk into. I have now released that. I belong anywhere I go. In this room, I belong. If I'm down the street, I belong there. Now, is the ground fertile necessarily? Do I feel all those things? No, but do I belong? Do I feel like I've earned the space to be there? Absolutely. I have no question as a Black woman, I had to work 2 to 3 times more than the next person. I absolutely belong. But more than that, I found in my life, home is where my intention is. It's where my loved ones are. So if belonging is home, my people are there, I'm good. Like, it doesn't have to be this perfectly curated, it's now giving back to the settler way of like, things have to be perfect. Things have to be this way for it to be right. And so I think in so many different ways, we have to just question what we think we know.
The last question from me before we move on to Q&A is actually about, well, maybe I'm asking you to not prophesize, but I'm curious because you do receive messages all around, and where you live, LA just experienced really, the lands, the people, the animals, everyone involved. It was quite traumatic. What might the land be saying, and the community, the soul of the communities be saying and sharing right now in these moments?
Yes. I love that you frame land as a relative or as like a sentient being, because it is. Um, you know, those fires to me represent a lot of different things. One, the speed and might and abundance by which it moved through communities reminded me of his power, of fire's power. It also reminds me, though, that after many fires, right, the land is more fertile. And what that means in terms of what we want to rebuild or build. I also think that, you know, our non-human kin experience this in large part because of human irresponsibility, right? Or lack of stewardship, right? Because for Indigenous people, we've had controlled fires. Like we have
Yeah.
ways of, right, making sure either this doesn't happen or that this happens in a way that protects all life. So in that way, it's a loud reminder to really return to Indigenous ways. I mean, I also work outside of, writing a book for the Sierra Club. And we have been bringing the alarm about climate change and all of the things that we are now experiencing. But I think that this fire, I have so many thoughts because in some ways it has devastated communities, but in wealthier neighborhoods, it has become the ticket to like rebuild bigger and better. And it really, I mean, it shows the tale of two cities very clearly. It has exposed, let me say this differently, what has already been there, but magnified it and really amplified disparities and devastation. And what I find poetic, sadly poetic, is that it doesn't matter where you live in Southern California, not just LA, your air quality has become hazardous. Our air is no longer our water, the fish, right? And so it is omnipresent. This isn't their problem. It's not, I don't live in a place that was impacted personally by the fires in terms of my home, but my land, air, water, all the elements, absolutely. And we're inhaling it. We are, and in that way, it's very omnipresent. And, you know, I am sitting with the fact you reap what you sow. And whether it is my, I don't believe it's my fault, but it has become my responsibility to really now become aware of what are the Indigenous practices? How do we tend to the land? I'd always let that go to, like, that's a government thing. It's out of my scope. I don't know anything about that. So, but now I'm very interested in the literal tending of the land and protection of human and non-human kin in ways I hadn't been previously. And I know on the news it probably looked a lot worse than maybe it was.
Well, what you're saying about taking care, engaging in remembering and bringing back these, life-affirming ways of stewarding the land, that I think dovetails so lovely with this intention of small local village community in these present day times.
Listen,
How would it
you
feel
want to come on down? Yeah.
Yes.
Come on.
How would it feel to shift over to some questions from some of our participants today? All right. Well, we have our first question from someone. It says, how can someone tap into their African ancestry without speaking over those more obviously read as Black?
How can someone tap into their African ancestry without speaking over those who are obviously read as Black, meaning you are white presenting and want to tap? Help me understand the question.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
have any follow-ups from that person,
Okay.
but that's what it kind of sounds like to me. If I'm white
Okay.
presenting or lighter skin and somebody reads darker, definitely is not going to be mistaken for Black. How do I,
Yeah.
tap into my stuff and not speak over them?
I think that if you are not Black, there is a deep and beautiful heritage and ancestry that is waiting to be discovered, right? Waiting to be explored. And I encourage people to do the work of talking to their relatives or their chosen family, whomever they find as loved ones, to really get to the core of who they are. I am cautious to, well, I believe everyone in some way is African because the first humans were in Africa. I want to help people find their heritage and culture as it relates to their family, their kinship, their, their people, if you will.
Mm.
And that can be defined in many ways, but I think what I'm saying here is uh, if you are Black, I think the African beingness is very accessible to you. And I think if not, there's an exploration that needs to be done within your own family, within your chosen family, within your kin to discover what that is and if there are any connections or roots to the African heritage. I hope I'm answering your question. Thank you for the question.
We also have another question. Now, this one's kind of about dream time. If you could dream into existence one thing that would shift the way we move through the world, what would it be?
I love this question. Thank you.
Hmm.
I think if I could shift value from money or product, whatever, capitalism, to promiscuous care
Mm.
or to a way of being where we just are caring, concerned, and nurturing of ourselves and each other, that would be just a beautiful thing. Just a beautiful thing. I think about it actually a lot. Like, most people when they see babies, if you're like under 3 months, everyone's so caring. Can I get you something? And, it's just like does the baby need anything? Imagine if we kept that energy
Mm.
into, our 80s, 90s for our elders. If we just kept that, are you okay? Are you good? What do you need? To a place where we felt, yeah, whole. I think
Mm.
that's how we're supposed to feel.
That
So
sounds
thank
more
you for
like our
that
natural
question.
state.
Yes.
Mhm. Now, how do we imagine liberated Black futures when we are constantly navigating landscapes designed to erase us?
To the point of may you never forget you are already free. I think you are living in a liberated Black future in that no one can take your humanity. No one can take, what you know to be true. And when I think about erasure, we're
Mm.
erased to, I don't know who this person is, but you have loved one like Preston. You can't be erased as far as I'm concerned.
Mm.
I know you now, and I know what you think, what you believe. Like you have value to me. You may never, uh, be president, right? Be the most famous person, but that doesn't mean you didn't exist. That doesn't mean you didn't matter. And that's something I'm trying to unlearn, like unknown to who. We play around and say Black
Mm.
famous, but like, you know what we mean? Like, yeah, we know who you are, but we also know they don't know who you are. And that's like an interesting dynamic where I think if we untether to the idea of necessarily being accepted or understood by the white gaze, that's freedom right there. Like,
Mm.
I don't really think about what y'all are doing. I do me, and I'm free right now. And I want to offer that to all of you. You can't be erased if you're here, and we see you and we engage with you. And I think just moving more from an asset strength based way of like, that's the paradigm shift. I am here. I'm not a criminal. I am not the things you say.
Hmm.
And so I can move into the future in that way.
It also sounds like I'm hearing like part of this liberation is stepping away, casting aside the prioritization or importance of white gaze, white thought, and impact and white impact, like your impact
Yes,
on white folks.
yes, yes. And you've probably in this conversation heard me say, I've released, I've released. I offer that phrase to other people. Please release yourself of
Mm.
the chains of whatever keep you thinking that you need to do something a certain, release that way of thinking. I am no longer doing that. It's a powerful thing. It's a mantra to say to yourself, I think.
Well, I think this question is great because after the release or through the release, this question is how do we recognize when we are in our natural state? Is it something we uncover on our own, or does it come through community and the connections we build? How have you uncovered and come into that?
I have really started to pay attention to what brings me joy,
Mm,
whether it's, you know, diss tracks or sunshine. Um, and I think that it's important that we think about why we do the things we do. So, for instance, why did I go to grad school? Because my immigrant parents told me to. There wasn't really a like I did certain things because, and then when I reflect, okay, so I went. Why did I stay? Well, they were teaching me about trade-offs, and I got my degree in public policy, and I learned these very specific ways of analyzing, laws and different kinds of policies and its application. Did I think that worked? It's like asking yourself the five whys. Why did I do that? Does this make sense? Not really. Like, and for me, as someone who spent a lot of money on education, that was hard because I'm like, well, I invested in this, not just my time, but my money. The generations of, you know, Africans before me who believed education was the way to everything. I do have major questions about the state of higher education. Um, recently Ruha Benjamin said, and I just gasped when she said this. She said, higher education has been, not present company included, has become hedge funds that teach classes. And I was like, well, you're not wrong, right? Like, what are, and so I say all that to say my natural state is probably to write poetry in the woods or something, but I would never really know that because every single opportunity presented to me was about advancement and like they all kind of build on each other. It's like
hmm.
they're like interlocking building blocks. Can't do this without that one. And then you can't go there without this. And so there is no, in a capitalist society, living financially free without all kinds of other stuff. Like, yes, okay, you may not have debt, but you have golden handcuffs, or you have, it's always something. And so just asking yourself and having the courage to give yourself an honest answer. Like,
Mm.
yeah, it's hard for me to say hedge funds are conducting classes because I've invested in this, but it's true. I know that to be true. I have to start telling the truth to myself. If I don't tell the truth to myself, I'm not going to reach what is my most natural state because I'm going to be in cycles of delusion and, you know, pursuing things that aren't. I do believe in like destiny that are not in my path,
Hmm. Might not be what I came to this world to do. It's not.
not our
Yeah.
ministry. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. It's not my ministry. Mhm.
How do you, I'm interested, how do you return, if you use that phrase, returning to your natural state?
Yeah, I call it my natural state. I call it my native state. It's like, I go back to like, I learned it from Audre Lorde, right? And reading her and getting back to that state. From my trauma as a child, like in youth and child, growing up program cis male, I just learned not to feel anything in my body. And that was me for decades. And then when I started feeling things, like my body just does not stop talking to me. So I know in my gut when I'm in my native state or my natural state or not. It hurts.
Mm-hmm.
I literally have like, my body is not going to be shy about it. And I also can feel when I am like I feel pulled towards something. It is like
Mm-hmm.
passion, it is joy, it is allurement versus or when I'm running away from something. And for me, that also lets me know, like, oh, that is what I am naturally called towards. That is where my aliveness is. That is where I want to be. Because I can feel my heart literally, my existence being pulled towards it. It wants to hold me. I want to hold it. And
Yeah.
I wish I could say like they were like living in these systems that I can always follow that way. I can't always follow that way. And maybe I just it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage.
Yes, I agree.
I've got another question. Actually, so we've got a question here. It says, I am a current PhD student in the Anthropology and Social Change Department at CIIS, and I'm researching how my tribe's epistemologies can heal trauma. What are some possibilities or limitations of decolonizing trauma?
Now, decolonization has become a metaphor for everything. And so I personally have questions on what does decolonizing trauma sort of mean, so we have shared understanding. But I think anthropology is one of those areas of study that is so complicated. There's so many, in different ways, indigenous scholars who say, Native Americans have had the great plague of having anthropologists study them. And, we know of Maslow, we know of all these different ways that their ideologies have been misrecognized and transformed into something that they're not. And we know that there's something lost when there's almost a voyeuristic way of looking at a group of people. But from what I'm hearing in this question, this person is connected to the tribe. So there's that relationship. And I think that's what makes it very special and distinct and unique. And I think it is so important. I'm going to just reframe trauma to mean maybe oppression. People are not defined by their oppression. And I think that is sometimes the trick of the trauma, like, oh, we have experienced subjugation or genocide or all of these. And that is absolutely true. I would not walk away or hesitate from accepting that. And we are not defined by those things. We are
Mm,
defined by our freedom, by our warrior nature, by our healing nature, right? By those things that we know we have ancestrally inherited. And I hope I've done this also in the book. We can both acknowledge these things as real and true and horrific and experience a kind of learning that's not hinged to trauma. I mean, there's just to give you an example, I will not. Enslavement is white history. That has nothing to do with us. And what I mean by that is there's a framing of like somehow Black history is about, you know, being enslaved and having all these difficult experiences and hardship and all of these bad things. That is not my history. That's not what defines me. My
mm,
history is of rebellion, of resisting these things. It is of, and I say this because my husband is born and raised in um, this country and for generations. I mean, since the country's founding, his people have been Black. And so when we think about our collective history, I don't think of it as, and there's things that anthropology misses, but I don't think of it as this hard, these series of experiences that were traumatic. though that is epigenetic and absolutely existed. I think of it as, look at the revelation and miracle of Blackness. Look at the
Mm.
incredible defying nature that is us. Just the flower that grew from concrete. It's a paradigm shift. And a flower should not be growing in concrete. That's ridiculous. Like, that's not a fertile environment. And yet we bloom and we dream of walking, like the poem says. So I think that that's really important and really the purpose of the research. What is it for? Why are we looking into this? Preston, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that also.
You know, for me, I would take a route outside of the traditional academic process. And that would be through ceremony, and that would be through storytelling, that would
Yes.
be um, through just embodied times with my relatives, all of my relations. And I think for me, in order to sink into that place and maybe not decolonize trauma necessarily, but to like unweave the bindings, my analytical brain needs to step out of the picture for a minute because it talks so much and so loudly through so much of the day. The other parts of me have a deeper memory, I think, and also um, they have more compassion and maybe even more creativity. I have to I have
Mm-hmm.
to I have to take it outside of the university structure. And then if I choose to bring it back in, or if my elders say I can bring it back in, um, then I've got to be fearless in not renaming it and not changing the
Mm-hmm.
language and not changing, as you say, like, keeping that paradigm shift.
Yes. Yes. I love the ceremony. I love that.
It's one of my big ways of relating to the rest of the world. Yeah. Um, and well, for me, it's like it opens that portal, right? And
Yeah.
here, our next question is actually about your parables opening portals. Parables open portals to new lands and ways of seeing land, power, possibility, and love. Do you see them as maps, guides, or something else? And how do you hope people hold and work with them, especially in spaces of healing and therapy?
I see them as guides. I do. But I could also see them as maps. I think I see them as whatever um, artifact people use for direction.
Mm.
So I guess that's a map, that's a guide, could be a religious way. These are not religious, but I'm saying, however you interpret it. Um, and I think that people read them once and understand the lesson, the gist, right? The table is about how we organize society. The tree is about whose knowledge is valued. But then I hope you go back and you hear or read the portion that talks about song, that the tree offers us song, shade, and sustenance. Those are not just alliterative words. What are the songs? Do you ever sit outside and listen to the trees? What are the ways, what are the fruits of a tree that we literally eat? What are the spiritual fruits? What are a kind of interrogation with, there was a lot of intentionality in the choice of words. And there also wasn't. And so are people seeing things that maybe I didn't intend, but also are there? What else is in the parables that can offer intergenerational connection? I wrote those stories
Mm.
hoping they could be children's books. I mean, I really see that as like, if a child can understand the story, I was successful. And that really, Huey Newton said, the revolution belongs to the young. So I'm hoping that even if the other parts of the book don't connect, that people of all ages can tap in somewhere in the book.
Mhm.
There are quotes. There are, I say it's polyglot intentionally. And that the parables, also, the one parable I very rarely talk about is the last one, the
The
parable of
trip.
the traveler. Yeah, and that one is so rooted in Oakland, just my time in Oakland. And I really hope that connects to young people, just the spirit of it, the way it was written, and the imagery. And so, yes, I think it can offer healing and wholeness and hopefully wellness by showing people a mirror. This is who you
Mm.
are. This is who we are. And I'm hoping that uh, the parables are you kind of step through the mirror. They're that portal.
Yeah, they felt alive for me. I couldn't see them as non-living beings. And I wonder, I want to like invite, whoever asked this question to also think about parable as a verb instead of a noun, right? Like
Mhm.
why do things have to be locked into one state of being? This parable can be a guide at this time. It can be a teacher at this time. It can be like companion at this. So maybe it's verbing. It's changing just as we are changing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I love that.
I think this may be our last question for the evening. Can you name or can you share other Black artists or sources alongside Kendrick and Toni Morrison that embody Black joy for you? Who are
Yes.
your folks that embody Black joy?
So I love June Jordan. I'm reading her um, memoir. She's a poet and she created Poetry for the People while I was at Berkeley. Yesterday was Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde's birthday. So some great Aquarians were born recently.
Mm.
Um, I, I love Robin D.G. Kelly. Um, Obviously, Angela Davis has been a great honor. Nikki Giovanni, just a gift to humanity. Um, Mark Lamont Hill, all of these people sort of embody a kind of integrity and commitment to speaking truth to power that I really, respect. I also, speaking of artists, I'm going to take that broadly. Nipsey Hussle, who is a LA, um, LA Eritrean rapper, who has a very strong message of self-determination. Oh goodness, there's so many thinkers who have, it's hard to just like keep it in a short list. Goodness. I have been deeply, deeply influenced, and this may seem out of the ordinary, but Paulo Coelho's manuscripts from Accra. He has the historical philosophy novels on lock. He really has cornered the market on some of these books. And so um, I really enjoy those. Those are not as incorporated. And I brought up Paulo Coelho. He's not Black presenting, and I think we can still access Black joy even through people who are not Black. That is where our kinship and interdependence
Mm.
lives. Yeah, so many. Malcolm X, Anna Tubbs. There are just countless writers and thinkers, Chinua Achebe, that have influenced me and are thankfully in the suggested reading section of the book. So they are very clearly available, but I wanted to share those as sort of my short list.
Ah, well, thank you for sharing those. They are in the book, along with a fantastic um, index and the citations. I mean, the flow between, I love it. I'm like the flow between the academic and the artistry is really beautiful. As has been this conversation with you, Ida. It's been a pleasure and an honor. to be able to share space and time with you and to hear your thoughts, to experience the radiance from your heart and also the fantastic work in your book. It has been with me in the garden as I've been listening. It's been at my kitchen table. Thank you so much for what you've offered.
Thank you so much for the space, for adding so much light and love to the conversation, and for sharing your brilliance with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone who's joined us tonight. And from this space, we'll say have a great evening. Peace.